Good evening, everybody. I am so excited. I can't tell you how excited I am. You see, it all started about 1.5 years ago at Laund Abbey in Leicester when I met the amazing Emily. And God gave me a specific word for her. When she'd finished talking, the only way I can describe it is that I couldn't take my eyes off of Emily. And the song, "You are so beautiful to me, can't you see?" And you know the rest. And God said, go and tell Emily she is beautiful. She is everything I want. Everything I've wanted is as she is right now. And it blew me away. And Emily invited anybody who would like to sit with her after she'd finished talking to another room. And I went and told her. And we've been friends ever since. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Emily to you tonight so that she can bless you. And she will.
Right, I think, is that on? Can you hear me? Brilliant. Thank you, Kate, for introducing me. Just to absolutely clarify, I am deaf. So that's one reason why I asked if you could all hear the microphone. But if during the evening, as I'm talking, if you can't hear me, please wave, so that I know to try and speak a bit louder. Or if I'm too loud, put your fingers in your ears so that I know to be a bit more quiet. But it was really nice to... Oh, sorry, let me just unzip my Bible. There we go. But it's lovely to be here with you. As Kate has already said, we first met ages ago at Laund Abbey, and we sort of imagined maybe one day I could get here, and then, as we all know, lockdown. I don't have to say anymore, just lockdown, but finally we've made it. So what I'm going to do this evening is tell you a little bit about my story, about my testimony. But one thing I am absolutely fine with is interruptions. So if anybody has any questions or comments, or even if you want to say, I disagree with you on that, I'll be fine. So stick up your hand and call out your interruption, and interruptions are fine by me. But as I say, I'm just going to tell you a bit about my story. Before I go right back to the beginning, I'll just say who I am now. I write books. They're at the table at the back. And if you'd like to have a look at them over coffee or later, then please do. If you'd like to have a look at them and then you think, I don't like the look of this book, then that's fine. Just put it back on the table. If you'd like to have a look at it and you think, I like the look of this book, then you might want to consider buying it. But there's no pressure at all. And that is probably the last thing I'm going to really say about the books. But I'll be around over coffee if you want to talk to me about the book. Give me a bit of water. So, I'll start from the beginning. I was born in Leicester, grew up in Leicester, still live in Leicester. My sister used to live in Ramsey, which I must admit, when I was told where this church was, I hadn't actually twigged that it's very close to Ramsey. But coming along, I saw the signs and I thought, my sister used to live near here. But my sister used to live in Ramsey, so I have been in this sort of area, unbeknown to me, before. But I grew up in Leicester. When I was born, I could hear absolutely fine. Didn't know anything was wrong with me at all. So as I grew up, more people joined the family, and I ended up with 3 younger sisters who are, they're great most of the time. But no, and growing up, we we were a fairly normal, boisterous family. Something that was really central to life right from the start was the Christian faith. I grew up going to church. That was just part of what we did as a family. We had faith. We were also very musical. So I played the flute, I played the piano, I played the accordion, guitar, lots of different instruments. I enjoyed sport, but every sport so long as it's not football. If it was football, no, sorry to the football fans, but no. But every other sport I enjoyed. I enjoyed school, I enjoyed academic study. Basically, it was what you might call a fairly good life growing up. When I was 15, I was doing an athletics competition with my school. In all the schools in the area, we were having a competition, and I was due to run the 800 metres, which for those who don't know, perhaps those who are more into football than athletics, 800 metres is twice around the track, which was my favourite distance. So I was running that. And then the teacher who was in charge came over to me, literally as I just ran the 800 metres, and he said, Emily, I want you to do the long jump. He said, the person who does the long jump is ill. They can't do it. And I want you to do it. Now, I've already said to you, I really liked sport, every type of sport, but I did not like getting sand in my shoes. And for those of you who know about the long jump, you have to jump into a sand pit. But I sort of said, oh, yes, okay, a competition's a competition. So I did the competition, and to my amazement and everyone's amazement, I came second, even though I hadn't really jumped before. And as I walked away from the sand pit with the sand in my shoes, a man in a tracksuit came up to me. My dad was with me too. That's my dad sitting at the back with a blue shirt. You can talk to him later. Yep, hi, Dad. So anyway, the two of us were walking back across the field, and this man in a tracksuit came up. And he said, I saw you jump. He said, you're really good. He said, I want you to come and join my club. Now, if he'd grown 3 heads, I could not have been more surprised than him asking me to join his club. And I can remember standing there, and I said to him, well, what would that mean? What does that involve? And he said, it means training every Sunday with my athletics club. Every Sunday, come down and train. And I'm not commenting on sports on Sundays per se. Obviously, everyone has to work that one out for themselves. But for me, as I stood there thinking of sport every Sunday, I thought, I go to church on Sundays, and I can't do both. So that's the reason you've not seen me in the Olympics doing the long jump, because I did not train for the long jump. I went to church. But that was the first time in my life when I really had to choose between something I loved, which was sport, and God. And it's something that stood me in really good stead throughout the rest of my life. What comes first? Things come up, and who will I put first? Is it God, or is it something else? And often with wrestling, in the end, I get to say, God comes first. So, yes, I did the long jump, but at the same time as doing the long jump, almost unnoticeable at first, but gradually got worse, was that I could not walk in a straight line. So when I walked to school, my friends would walk straight, and I was walking next to them, going like that, literally wobbling along. And it became a bit of a joke, and they would tease me about it. I walked twice as far as everyone else. And there was a bit of a joke, but it was also quite normal. So time went on. I got more and more wobbly. And then, towards the end of, I think it was year 10, I went on a kind of outward bound trip with the school, where you do all sorts of things, abseiling, go canoeing, rock climbing, all this kind of thing, which I was okay at. I managed all those things. Then on the last day, they said to me, we're going caving. Well, they didn't just say to me, actually. They said to the whole group, we're going caving. And we did. And it was fine. We walked into the cave. No, it was fine, no problem, until in the cave we went round a corner and it got lower and lower, narrower and narrower, and darker and darker. And in the end it was pitch black. Could see nothing. And I could not work out why I couldn't walk anymore. Everyone else walked through this low tunnel and then they walked out, but I was stuck in the pitch black in this cave. Every time I tried to walk, I literally fell over. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was really scared. In the end, I just had to stay. And finally, my teacher came back through the cave from the way they'd all been, came back, took my hand, led me out of the cave. Once I could see, once the light was there, I was fine, and I walked off. But for that moment in the pitch black, I couldn't do anything. And my teacher came and got me. And you know, that's a bit what it's like with God sometimes. We can feel that we're in a pitch black place. We don't know which way to go. We can't stand straight. We can't do anything, but we can just stay. And God comes in and gets us. He comes into that darkness with us. So all these sort of things were happening to me. Wobbly balance, couldn't stand in the dark. I was also getting really bad headaches, but we didn't know why. So life carried on. I did go to my GP, who was really focused on the headaches, and he said, it's migraine, take these tablets, which I did, and they didn't help. So I went back, took different tablets, they didn't help. Back and forth, nothing helped. Until in the end, and when I say in the end, probably 18 months of back and forth, he said, I'm going to refer you to neurology at the local hospital to see what's going on inside your head, see if anything can help. So I turned up at neurology en route to my sixth form lesson, and I thought the neurologist would give me the tablet that would fix my headache. That didn't actually happen. The neurologist put me through some tests, first and foremost. He said, I want you to touch your finger to your nose, like that, which as you can see I can do. I'll show you how I did it back then. So I was 16 years old back then, sitting in his office, doing that, except I went, literally, and I'm honestly not exaggerating, I could not touch my nose. And then he said, walk with your feet one in front of the other. I couldn't do it. I fell over. Lots and lots of tests that I failed. All these tests. And in the end, he said, you're not leaving the hospital. You can't leave the hospital. You need to go and have an MRI scan, brain scan, see what's going on in there. Which is what happened quite quickly. I was admitted to a ward. Then I was told to get changed into a beautiful hospital gown, which if anybody knows what hospital gown is like, they're not actually really beautiful at all. They're really hard to tie up. But I managed to get into this gown, and I went down for the scan. Somehow the scan place is always at the bottom of the hospital. So I went down for the scan. My mum was with me. I got to the doorway of the scan room. And I don't know if anybody here has ever had an MRI scan. I imagine some have. But for those who haven't, it's basically you go into a room that is probably maybe about a quarter the size of this, and it's empty except for a tunnel. You can see a tunnel in the middle of the room. And I realised I was going to have to lie in that tunnel. And I was really scared by this point. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm not going in there. And the radiologist said, you've got to go in there because we need the pictures of your head. So I said, well, I'm not going in by myself then. And he said, you're going to have to. And to be fair, he had a point. It's so small in that tunnel that two people wouldn't fit. So I had to go on my own. But he said, your mum can come in. and sit by the machine, which was great until I realised that my whole body would be inside that tunnel. I wouldn't be able to see out. But my mum said, your feet will be sticking out. And she said, so I will sit by your feet. I'll put my hand on your foot so you know that I am there. And the scan was long. We were getting on for an hour, and the whole time there was a hand on my foot. She didn't move her hand at all that whole scan. And, the feet was the only bit she could touch, so she did. And sometimes in life, well, we've already talked a bit about when things get dark and pressed in, but if it like in that tunnel, we can feel that we want to close ourselves off, that we feel too scared to open things up. But let's not be scared to just leave a little bit of us open, to let God reach in and just say, I'm here with you in this. So that's what happened, my very first scan. I still have those scans. At least once a year, I have to go in those scans. Now, my mum does not still come in with me into those scans. She's actually only been in once, the very first time. But I have learnt a way of coping in the scan, which without a hand on my foot. And that is 3 words. Now, I imagine, don't worry, I'm not going to sing to you, but if I mentioned a song, you might all have heard of it. It's a really old hymn called It Is Well With My Soul. And I can remember hearing it before I lost my hearing. And it's a lovely hymn, but the words are so special. It is well. And when I'm in that scan, closed off, you can't see out, but inside my head, despite everything else, I know that it is well, because God is there, and ultimately God reaches inside and says, it is well. So whatever we're going through, let's just remember we have a God who reassures us, it is well. So the results of the scan, I went back up to the ward, and I went to my bed, and when I got near my bed, I saw that there were doctors all around my bed waiting for me. Now, to be honest, I've had a lot of hospital experience since then. I've been there a lot of times, and I have never, ever had doctors waiting for me. I've waited for doctors nearly every time, but I've never had them wait for me. But that one time, they were waiting, and they were waiting to give me the results of my scan. The results which were 2 big tumours, 1 each side of my head, 1 there, 1 there. And they said, they're so big, they're about to kill you. And they said, they're so big, we can't let you leave the hospital. We're going to have to operate as soon as possible, but before we do, you need to be stable. So by that I mean inside stable. So they gave me steroids, which were due to kind of stabilise the tumour. Sorry if there are any medics in here, and I don't really know the medical terminology, so forgive me. So anyway, I had these steroids for a week. I don't know if any of you have ever had steroids before, but one thing they do is make you very hungry. So I was eating for about 5 horses that week. I ate and ate and ate. And then in the end, after a week, they said, you're stable enough to travel. You can go to Nottingham, which is a specialist hospital for head stuff. You can go there and see the consultant, which is what I did. And the consultant said, and his words are written on my mind. He said, as you know, you have 2 tumours. As you know, we need to remove them. As you know, when we do, you will be deaf. And I can remember sitting there and the room just started spinning. No one had told me that I would lose my hearing when I had the tumours removed. So, managed to recover from the shock of that one, and he said, we will only remove 1 tumour first. So you'll only be deaf in 1 ear, which was good. So, but he said, before we can operate, you need to get even more stable. So he said, go home, lie in bed for a month. And when after that month, come back and I will operate. So I went home and I lay in bed and I lay in bed and I lay in bed. And it was really hard time. Just a week before, I'd been, to all intents and purposes, a normal student, heading to college, doing my A-levels, seeing my friends. And then suddenly, I'm in bed and I can't move. And I thought, I'm going to pray. I've already mentioned that my family are Christians. We've grown up with faith. And the first thing we do, and always have done, is pray about things. So I thought, this is the worst situation in my life. I'm going to pray about it. And suddenly I understood what people mean when they say, my prayers aren't getting through to God. My prayers are bouncing off the ceiling. I can't pray. First time in my life I've experienced that. I found it really hard to pray. But other people stepped in. Other people stepped in and prayed for me. That did involve other people knowing what was going on in my life. And I'll be honest, I didn't want that. I didn't want people knowing the ins and outs and all the horrid stuff about tumours. But thankfully my mum encouraged me to tell people. Because if she hadn't, I wouldn't know the blessing of receiving prayer. And so I encourage all of us to ask people for prayer. People in our church, people in our fellowship, friends, ask for prayer. All my life I'd been somebody who prayed for other people. Other people were going through a bad time. Oh yeah, let me pray with you. Let me pray with you. But I had not been somebody who said, can you pray with me? And it's a real blessing to pray with people. So I do encourage us, whatever we're going through, big or small, ask someone to pray with us. So in the end, I did go back to the hospital and I had the surgery. And it was 12 hours of brain surgery. But whether it's because I was only 16 or what, I don't know. But it didn't occur to me that anything would go wrong. So I went in, 12 hours of surgery, woke up, deaf in one ear. I could hear fine in one ear. And I'd been right. Nothing went wrong. And I thought, 10 days in hospital, I'll be back at college and everything's fine. Until the next day. So the day after my surgery, I suddenly began to lose consciousness again. And it turned out that fluid had built up in the hole that the tumour had left in my head. So fluid was building up and it was knocking my consciousness out. So they took me back into theatre, put a shunt in to drain the fluid, and I still didn't wake up. So then 2 days later, which was my 17th birthday actually, I was not learning to drive a car on my 17th birthday. I was being put in intensive care because I still didn't wake up. 5 days into intensive care, the doctor said to my parents, she's never going to wake up. She's not going to live. We need your permission to switch off the life support machine. Which, over coffee, you can talk to my parents about what that decision was like if you want. I don't know what it was like. But I imagine it was really hard. But they said yes. They said, yes, you can switch off, because they knew that I had faith. They knew that when I die, I will go to be with Jesus. And it's so important to make that decision, to have that sense of peace that we know where we are going. So they said to the doctors, yes, you can switch off. No prizes for guessing that the doctors did not actually switch off the machine, because I'm here right now, aren't I? I did live. But the doctor said, yeah, there's a chance that she'll live, but she needs to learn to live. Now, bearing in mind, I was lying in a bed with a machine breathing for me. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. The doctor said she needs to learn to do everything again. Except there's one thing that, ironically, I could do. I could hear in my one good ear. That was about all I could do, hear. And the doctor said, if she's going to learn to live, the first step is if she learns to breathe, literally take a breath. because the machine was doing it for me. And they said she will only breathe if someone tells her to. If someone said breathe, I went. If no one said it, the machine went, for me. And the doctor said someone needs to tell her. So my dad sat by my bed for I don't know how long. You can ask him afterwards. And he said, breathe, breathe, breathe. Like that, probably to the rhythm of his own breathing, breathe. And when he told me to, I did it. And gradually I learnt. But the thing is, I couldn't breathe by myself. I just could not do it. And maybe sometimes in life, there's things that we just can't do. And we really think we ought to be able to do it by ourselves. And we struggle on, frustrated that we can't do it. And maybe God steps in and says, you don't need to do it all by yourself. You don't. Just let me step in and tell you, breathe, breathe. One step at a time. So gradually, I learnt to breathe and do various other things for myself, move, sit up. But one thing that I had to learn to do, which I wouldn't have known the order this happened before it happened to me, you need to learn to sit up before you can stand, which now I've just said it actually makes perfect sense. But at the time, it wouldn't have occurred to me. You have to sit up before you can stand. So in order for me to sit up in a chair beside my bed, I couldn't get to the chair without being lifted. And so there's this thing called a hoist. And it's like a strip of material. It's like a hammock, I suppose. And you're laying onto the hammock. And the hammock lifts you off your bed, swings you over, and plops you on the chair. Well, no, not like it plops you on the chair. And so I had this hoist day in, day out to get me on the chair. And it was a scary contraption. Bearing in mind I didn't have any strength to move. I was just literally lying in the hoist like this as I swung across. And one particular day, this was happening, and my mum was visiting, and the hoist was going across, and she suddenly saw me slipping out of the hoist. Literally out of, because I was very, very thin. I was very skinny. And I literally slipped out of the hoist. And my mum, from across the room, lurched over, put her hands under me and caught me before I totally fell out of the hoist. And so gradually, obviously, I did get stronger and didn't need the hoist anymore. But sometimes I did still need the hoist. And, sometimes maybe some of us feel not literally in a hoist, but almost as though we're not in control. We're moving along. Life is moving us along, and we're not in control. We can't do anything about it. Well, if we feel like we're falling, let's remember that God always comes in and catches us. A bit like my mum caught me. God will always catch us when we fall. Another thing that I was gradually able to do was go out of the hospital in a wheelchair. That was really exciting for me because we're talking about weeks in hospital, and finally I could go out. And it was a big deal for my family too. Obviously they hadn't really seen me properly for a long time. So the big day came when I was having my outing. And looking back, I probably looked a bit odd, still in my hospital gown and dressing gown, bandaged head. But anyway, I went out in this wheelchair with my family. My dad was in charge of pushing, so all was fine. We crossed over the road. There's a park opposite the hospital. And suddenly, my next sister down, Sophie, said, "Can I have a turn at pushing?" So she did. And she was okay. She was fine. Then my next sister down, Kirsty, "Can I have a turn at pushing?" So she did. And it was okay. She was fine. And then my next sister down, Pollyanna, the little one, "Can I have a turn at pushing?" And I went, no. And my dad said, "Here, have the handlebars." And my head was here, sitting in the chair. Pollyanna's head, standing behind me to push me, was about here. She could not see where she was going. And talk about white knuckle ride. I literally clung to that wheelchair as she careered down the road. But anyway, she did push me, and we live to tell the tale. But I just want to remind us that, again, if we perhaps feel that we're just sitting somewhere out of control, we don't know where life is going, we are not pushed by someone like my sister who can't see where they're pushing. We're pushed by a God who knows every step of our journey. He's the one that is walking with us. So I did gradually recover. As you can see, I'm standing now. I do still need a wheelchair sometimes, but I'm able to stand. And Pollyanna has also grown, so she can see over my head now, which is good when she pushes me. But I recovered sufficiently to go back to college, took my A-levels, went to university to do English literature, and halfway through my first year at university, began to not be able to walk in a straight line. And I began to get really bad headaches. And by this time, had an idea what it might be. And the doctor said, yeah, the tumour we removed has grown back even bigger than before. He said, we've got to go in again. He said, this time you will not lose your hearing because you've already lost it. He said that this time it's quite likely that your face will be damaged when you have surgery. By this time I was 19 years old. And I don't mind telling you, losing my facial nerve was my worst nightmare. I can remember saying to the doctor, take my hearing, make me deaf on the other side, make me completely deaf, but do not damage my face. Because I didn't want to look different. I wanted to blend in with the crowd. But the doctor had no choice. Obviously, he tried not to damage my face. But when I woke up, I knew. There's no need for intensive care. The surgery went really well, except my face didn't move that side. In fact, it was even worse, worse than it is now. You know, it really drooped down. And my confidence went through the floor. I was discharged from hospital. I went home, and then I didn't leave home. I just stayed in the house, playing the piano, eating baby food, because it was hard for me to chew. And my confidence went right through the floor, because I looked so different. And obviously, gradually, my confidence did come back. But it wasn't until years later that I really learned an important lesson about my face. Because as you can see, if I do this, that side still doesn't move. And it's still, I'll be honest, it's still not my favourite thing, but I'm okay with it now, I'm fine. But years later, my little niece, when she was about 18 months, she taught me about this. We went to a National Trust place, and as you might know, a big house. We went round the rooms, and often they have ceiling-to-floor mirrors, don't they? So you can see yourself. And I walked in with my little niece, who was just learning to talk. So is it about 18 months when they learn to talk? But anyway, yeah, just learning to talk. And she saw the mirror right ahead of her as she walked into the room. And she saw herself in the mirror. And she pointed. And actually I'm pointing at a baby, because she went, baby, baby, when she saw her own reflection. She said, baby. And I looked at where she was pointing. And I thought, that's Abigail. It's not a baby, it's Abigail, because that's her name. And I thought, when I look in the mirror of my life, not necessarily a literal mirror, but when I look in the mirror, I see damage. I suppose a literal mirror, I see face damage. But God sees more. God sees past our damage. And maybe some of us have damage that we see when we look in the mirror, things that we don't like about ourselves, that we can't not see when we look at ourselves. But I just want to assure us that God looks past all the damage and he sees us. A bit like Abigail just saw a baby, but I saw Abigail. We might just see damage, but God sees each one of us and he knows us by name. A favourite phrase of mine is you are more than you see in the mirror. You are more than you see in the mirror. Whether that's a literal mirror, whether that's a metaphorical mirror, whether you're drop dead gorgeous, whether you're slightly less than drop dead gorgeous, you are more than that, because God sees who you are inside. So 2 years after this, after the surgery when I lost my face, well, my facial nerve went, sorry. 2 years after that, bad balance again, headaches. And this time they said, yep, the tumour on the other side has grown back, so big that we're going to need to operate. And they sent me up to Manchester Hospital, where I got the categorical news from one of the top surgeons in the country. He looked at my scans and he said, we've got two options. He said, one, we don't operate, we operate and you lose your hearing. So either we operate and you lose your hearing, or we don't operate and you lose your life. That's what he said to me in black and white, your hearing or your life. Now, it wasn't really a choice. I had to have the surgery. So I agreed to have the surgery. I walked out of the hospital, and I don't know how much you know about Manchester, but one thing about Manchester is it always rains. I'm not even kidding. I've been lots of times, and it rains and rains. So when I walked out of the hospital after being told I would lose my hearing, it was raining. And I can remember my mum and dad were with me, and I can remember we hunched under our coats. We hurried to the car, rain, rain, rain. We got in the car, pulled out of the car park, and I was staring out of the window, rain running down the window. But through that, I saw a rainbow. There's a rainbow in the sky, and I thought, that's really good. I always like to see rainbows, but especially that day when my life was being rained on. It was still a rainbow. And it really kind of lifted me. But then we drove home down the M6, and it rained and rained and rained. And there was rainbow after rainbow after rainbow. And you know, I really think God put those rainbows there just for me. To be honest, I've done that journey, I don't know how many times since. And it's rained every time since. But I've never seen so many rainbows. Never seen them. I know that God, I know that God put those rainbows there for me to remind me that, yep, my life was pretty bleak, being rained on. Things were difficult, but there was still something there. Still his promise of hope. And I can remember sitting in the car, as I say, seeing the rain, and seeing all the rainbows and thinking, you know, in all this rubbish that is my life, I am going to find something good. And I called them rainbows, not literal rainbows, but I decided from that day on, I am going to find something good, even if everything is really hard and really rubbish. And I'll give you an example of what I mean about finding something good. And you might think it's really insignificant, but things like chocolate, genuinely. You know, if I'm having a bad day, if for whatever reason my health is not good, well, there's always chocolate. You know? Or, for example, if I'm in hospital and it's really hard, I've got a soft pillow. That's a rainbow. And you might think it sounds a little bit Pollyanna-ish, not my sister Pollyanna, the book Pollyanna, you know, Pollyanna who was always glad. It might sound a bit like that, but it's not ignoring all the rain going on, but it's not forgetting that there is always something good. So I encourage us, you know, find something good when things are difficult, not pretending things aren't bad, but that there's good in that. So I went home, then went back to Manchester to have the surgery, and I went in for the surgery, hearing, came out, deaf. And to be honest, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified when I woke up in that world of silence. I've never been so scared in my life. I thought I hit rock bottom when my face was damaged, but then when my hearing went further down, rock bottom. But it was really difficult, Communication was hard. I couldn't chat with people how I always had done. I couldn't understand the doctors. It was really, really hard. But there's one thing I learnt, as I'd never learnt before, and that is when bad things happen, God does not walk out. You know, if I stepped back and looked at my life, there I was, lying in a hospital room, big bandage round my head, couldn't really walk, couldn't hear, was struggling a bit with seeing, my eyes were sore. If I'd looked at myself, well, not worth sticking around for you, but actually God did. God said, yep, I'm sticking here, I'm not leaving. And that's the same for each one of us. Whatever we go through, God says, I'm here too. I'm here with you. You're not on your own. And not only does he say, I'm not here with you, I am here with you, but also he looks and he sees exactly what's going on. A bit like he saw that I had a bandage and was deaf and balance problems and ill. He saw exactly what I saw. And whereas I said, just go, you won't want me, God said, yeah, I do, I'm staying. And that's true for all of us. Even if we think, just go, God says, no, I'm staying. So, as I say, I woke up deaf. I was really scared. Went home, still scared, and was scared for a long, long, long time. But gradually I did begin to recover. And when I say recover, I mean get more confidence. I don't mean I recovered my hearing. I got more confidence. But there was one thing, that when I came back from hospital, having lost my hearing, there's one thing I couldn't do. Well, there's more than one thing I couldn't do, but one thing I couldn't do was get rid of my flute. Now remember I told you I played the flute. And when my face was damaged, I struggled to play the flute. When you play the flute, you have to be able to blow across the flute like that. And I struggled to do that. But I did it with my damaged face. But then when my hearing went, I couldn't play anymore. But I could not get rid of it. I held on to that flute for months. I'm not even just talking days. It stayed under my bed for a long, long time, and I couldn't get rid of it. And my mum would say, "Oh, are you going to get rid of that flute?" And I couldn't even talk about the flute. And then God began nudging me and saying, maybe it's time to get rid of that flute. And I would say, no, we're not talking about the flute. But God's very patient with me. He has to be patient with me. And he kept reminding me about this flute. And in the end, I said to him, okay, yeah, I'm ready to get rid of it. And he said, well, that's good, because you can get rid of it tomorrow. We had friends coming to the house, and one of them played the flute. And so when she came, I said what, to be honest, are some of the hardest words I've ever said. I said to her, would you like my flute? And she said yes, because inside I was still holding on to my flute, but I was trying to give it away, and she said yes. But she said, you have no idea how much I'd like your flute. She said, last Christmas, my husband said to me, I would love to get you a flute, but we can't afford one. But, he said, but God will provide you with a flute. And then maybe 3 or 4 months later, she came to the house. God had told me to let go of my flute. The God fulfilled his promise to her by giving her a flute. And I learnt such a lot that day. Not only about being glad that she can play the flute, she still plays that flute, but I learnt the blessing of letting go. Because, I was like that, holding on to my flute. But when I let go, my hands were open to receive blessings from God. And maybe some of us have things that we hold on to. I don't necessarily mean a flute, though maybe some of us are holding on to a flute. But think maybe, I don't know, frustrations or things from the past that we hold on to, we can't let go. But if we do, our hands are open for God to really bless us. And who knows what he's got in mind for us if we can only let go. So, as I say, I let go of my flute. Different things carried on. And to me, the flute was also symbolic of letting go of a lot of who I used to be so that I could move forward into what God wanted me to be. And with these tumours, it's not only hearing. They grow anywhere on my body. They affect virtually everything. One thing they affect is my eyes. Not all the time. I can see okay now, but sometimes I can't see. And I remember one particular occasion when I had bad infections in my eyes, and I literally had to just sit with my eyes shut, taped shut, and just sit. And obviously I can't hear. So in silent black world, I just had to sit there day after day after day. And it was coming up to Christmas, and my family were all going out to a concert that they'd all been waiting to go to for a long time. And so by this time, we knew sign language quite well, so they could write letters, write words on my hands. And so they wrote on my hand, "Goodbye." And I said, "Goodbye, have a nice time," even though I didn't know for sure they were there. I just wished them a good time. And so I knew they'd all left the house. And I sat there in my black silence, just waiting. And then suddenly, I felt somebody else sit down next to me on the sofa. This is not the start of a horror story, honestly. It's really not. But yeah, I felt somebody sit down next to me. And I sort of went like that, thinking, who's this? And I felt my mum's cardigan. Now, I knew it was my mum's because she'd given me a hug before she left. So I knew it was her. And I said to her, "What are you doing? Why aren't you at the concert?" And she fell back on my hand. She said, "I'm not going." And I said, "Well, why? You've been looking forward to it." And she said, "I'm not going because I'm staying here with you." And I said, "Well, why? Don't be silly. I'll be fine. There's nothing you can do to help me. I can't hear, I can't see, and you can't change that. Go to the concert." And she said, "No, I'm staying." And you know what she did? She stayed. She just sat next to me, and I couldn't see her. I couldn't hear her, but she was there. She said, "I'm staying." And, you know, that's what God says. God says, "I will stay. I will stay with you, and I will not leave." And that's just something to remind each one of us. God says, "Yep, I'm staying," even when we might try to push him away. As I say, I do speak sign language now, fairly well, but I wouldn't necessarily say fluently. But I do speak sign language. But I'm going to teach you all some sign language. Don't panic. Honestly, I'm sure you can all do it. And you don't have to show me, you can do it when you get home. But it's a very simple sign. And I learned this sign when I was singing a song once. And I do the songs in sign language. And I was watching an interpreter signing. And I thought, oh, how's she going to sign this bit? Because the lyrics were something like, "Whatever happens in my life, I hold on to God." Something like that, the lyrics said. And I thought, how will she sign that? And if you're watching me, this is how she signed that. She went, that's exactly what she did. Hold on to God. That's it. You've learnt the sign language. Because God is up there, isn't it? And hold on. And sometimes that is literally all I can do. You know, life just goes pear-shaped. Operations happen, things go wrong. But the one thing I can do is hold on to God. And that's the same for each one of us. I'm going to stop soon because I'm sure people are gasping for a cup of tea and cake. But before I do, I've just got something that I'd like to show you. And this is a plaque that I made myself. Well, I decorated it myself. If you can see the pink, it says love. And I put the pink stickers on. When I made this, it was in a group, and we all had a wooden thing that said love. And we all had a bag of the same stickers. And we all put our stickers on our word love. And no one else's looks quite like mine. And mine looks like no one else's. They all looked different. And that's what love's like. That's what God's love is like. It might not look the same for all of us, but it is. It is. And maybe we feel that God loves other people more than us, or that God could never love us, but actually he can. He loves each one of us individually. So just in closing now, I'd just like to read from Romans chapter 8. It says, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble, or hardship, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or danger, or sword? No. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced," and I really am convinced of this, "I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels or demons, nor the present nor the future, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus, our Lord." Amen. Thank you. So, do you want you? Sorry, I was taking over. Sorry, no. I was just going to say we're going to have, I believe we've got cake. We have got cake. The sign language for cake is cake. Okay? Yep. So we've got cake and coffee and chat, and feel free to look at the books or chat to me, any questions. Or if you prefer to ask your questions in the group, we are going to come back together at about 8:45 when we'll just sort of wrap up this evening. So that's the plan.